Hello everyone, welcome to the Net Online. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to kick things off as we always do with a short video clip that will correspond with our message today. Be sure to like and subscribe so we can give you future alerts for when we post messages, and drop a comment below, and thank you guys so much for joining us.
Spit. Let's go. Okay, no sauntering down the aisle. I don't like that. Just make time. Just get there. Just go.
Fine.
Okay.
All rise, please.
The bride is walking down the aisle. Maggie Carpenter is walking down the aisle. Oh, she's pausing. Keep eye contact. Stay with me. Eye contact.
Please be seated. Thank you.
I sneaked in a camera.
We are gathered here today. Please, no cameras now. Could we hold off photos until the end of the ceremony? Thank you. We are gathered here today. Where is she going?
Don't.
Maggie!
Lock the door!
Please be seated.
Stop, Maggie! No!
Oh, never a dull moment at a Maggie wedding.
There's a man coming downstairs with lots of candy in his pockets, and if you tickle him, he'll give you all of his candy. Here you go, little queen. Just tickle him, tickle him.
Whoa, no, not me. The naughty bride. The naughty bride. Get her, no. It's an money suit.
Wait! Wait!
Maggie!
Go.
Maggie! Maggie! Don't do it! No! Maggie!
He's running after her.
She's in pretty good shape, too.
Maggie! No, Maggie!
Where do you think she's going?
Wherever it is, she'll be there by 10:30 tomorrow.
Let's pray. We're going to go into this message here in just a moment. This teaching, Lord, we thank you for your presence. We could sense you here among us, and so Lord, we're trusting you now to speak, to impart wisdom, to be here in the midst of us as we delve into the principles that are rooted in your word. We commit this time to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. So, while I was praying over this session tonight, I was kind of talking to the Lord about the fact that I've taught this many years in different versions and forms to generations of young people. I've probably been teaching this teaching. I taught it 3 years ago was the last time, but I've been teaching it in intermittent periods for probably 30 years. And then I take my life and my experiences and kind of bring those to bear on the teaching. And so I watched people over the years, and many people that would literally hear the principles laid out multiple times. They would literally come. There was a period where our young adult ministry was so crowded and so fast moving that I would do it every year. And so for every year, for a number of years, I was doing a teaching. So people were catching it sometimes 2 or 3 times. And then I would watch people make decisions. I would watch the choices they're making. And they would seem, it was almost as if they had never heard anything that I brought from the scriptures, principles to bear on their lives. It's as if they could hear it and just tune it out. But yet they would come and like listening to the teaching. They would like They would come back. They would even come and hear it again. And I was kind of praying about that because you start thinking, am I going to make a difference? Am I going to be able to have an impact? Or some of the young people that are hearing this teaching this time going to actually receive wisdom and actually act upon the principles that I'm relating? And I felt like the Lord spoke to me. And it was this simple little saying that he used it multiple times in the New Testament, that Jesus would say to the crowds, he said, those that have an ear to hear, let them hear. And so I was reminded of the fact that not everybody that heard what Jesus was saying acted well either. In other words, he's saying if you have ears to hear, if you have the capacity, if you have the ability to actually hear what's being said, and then take it to heart and live it out, let him who has ears to hear, let them hear. And so the potential was, and of course he told the parable of the sower who sows the seed into the various types of soils. The soils represent the condition of our hearts. And so the idea was that people have a different heart, a different readiness to receive truth. The word, the seed being the truth of God's word. And so the soil being a ready soil, a good soil, a stony ground. There are all the different grounds and different distractions and things that keep people from acting well when they hear the word. And so Jesus, he had the same problem, is what I'm saying. That people could literally hear himself, Jesus himself, be there at that time, 2,000 years ago, while he's walking along the shores of Galilee and listening to the teachings and parables of Jesus, and still hear it, but not hear it. And so that was the word I felt like the Lord was giving me for y'all tonight. If you have ears to hear, let them hear. So are you receptive tonight? If you'll hear and you can incorporate the truth and the principles that I've been teaching, this is week number 7, and we have one more week next week. So we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, last week we spent a lot of time looking at the life of Rebecca and how she met Isaac and the principles that were kind of embedded in that. We had a neat kind of a small group breakout. It was a fun evening. But hopefully it was instructive. But even then, there were principles embedded in that amazing story. So tonight, we're going to look at, I just titled it Finding Confidence. Is that what I put? Yeah, Finding Confidence. And there's a lot of ways that people will have anxiety when it comes to relationships or dating or finding that person that they're going to make a decision and settle down with them the rest of their lives. And there's a lot of suspense involved in that. And there's a lot, sometimes it's a cloudy thing. And one of the things I want to mention is these principles are not entirely rigid. In other words, how people apply them in their individual situation varies from one person to the next. But the principles are rigid in themselves, but how they're applied sometimes is a little bit different for each person. Does that make sense? In other words, the moral law of God is unwavering, it's unchangeable. But how we apply sometimes some of the practicalities that we're talking about can be different for each person. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't want to sound like I'm relativistic when it comes to the moral law of God. Obviously, I'm not. But I'm talking about the practical application of some of the truth, some of the principles. So we talk about finding, so here's what I'm going to do tonight. Maybe this is kind of like a test, a collective test. So I realize this group that's here tonight all of you have not been to all of the sessions. But probably all of you have been to some of the sessions. Maybe. I mean, unless you're a first-time guest tonight. Maybe they're okay. There are a couple first-time guests. Okay, so you're exempt from this question. You are hereby adjudicated and pardoned from any responsibility. Okay, so anybody else who's been to any of the sessions at all should have some memory, albeit it may be a faint memory. You may actually remember something that I taught along the way. So, and I'm not going to take your response as a judgment on my ability to teach or impart truth. I've decided I'm not going to do that. But I am curious to see if I've gotten through to anybody. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. The question on the table, and I want to take a little time, and I know you're going to have to think a minute. Should I make this an open book test? Naomi says no. So let's see. So, y'all want to go with Naomi on that? It'd be a closed book test, meaning that if you had notes and you've been taking them, you could probably regurgitate a number of things, right? But let's see what you remember. So it's a closed book test, not open book test. If you're desperate and we get down to it, I may let you open your books and then tell us. I mean, in other words, if I do this and you can't come up with anything at all, then I'll say, okay, pull your notes out, help us, save us. Okay, so I need a scribe. Are you the scribe, Val? Okay, write these kind of pretty big across each one as we do it. I'm hoping there'll be several that y'all remember. So here's the question on the table tonight. Some of you have been to every session. Some of you have been to probably half of them. So there ought to be a pool of information that we can collectively come up with. So here's the question. Go ahead and put that up. So you're going to help me review. So what are some, okay, so anyway. So I made her laugh anyway. All right, so what are some of the principles that we have covered in the last 6 weeks? Which ones stand out to you or come to mind? Okay, I saw what happened there. I heard a murmur over here. Oh, that was mine. That was mine. That's the one I thought of. Okay, but I've covered about 8 principles and then subsets within that. Okay, not to be unequally yoked. Would you like to elaborate on that? What that actually means? Who wears a yoke? We're talking about an egg yolk? No, tell us what it means in just a short sentence. You don't have to, I don't want you to feel too much pressure. But
not equal in your walk with the Lord.
Okay, meaning that a person that you would prospectively date or consider in your future, that they need to have a walk with the Lord that's similar or equal to yours? Mm-hmm. Is that what that means? Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Temple, like your body's a temple.
Oh, yeah, okay. Does that mean like a Buddhist temple?
Why you gotta ask
would you like
questions?
to, Ashley, would you like to elaborate what that means?
That's all I got.
Would somebody like to help her? I think she's just having stage fright. You know what it means. And she's got it in her notepad. You sure you want to say what that means? That your body is a temple. Go ahead, Leah. Help her out.
I just had a different one.
A different one. Okay, all right. A different one's great. But I want somebody else maybe to elaborate on what she said about temple. Okay,
like
all right. Well, okay, Sophia, all right.
Your body's a temple, so you should dress modestly, and so treat your body right, and then also stay away from temptations like sexual immorality, adultery, and lust.
Pretty good, huh? Okay. All right. So, okay, I'm with you. I'm going with this. This is great. And so, Leah, you had another one.
Being in like the right season, like knowing the time and place when, if you know you're not ready, you're not in the right mindset, don't try to get into a relationship.
Yes.
Oh. And I rather not. That's what he told his daughter.
Oh, be able to say I'd rather not.
I'd rather not.
Like be able to say I'd rather
Right. She asked me, Dad, what do I tell this boy that wants to date me? And he's real persistent about it. And I said, well, honey, just tell him I'd rather not. And so she did that, and it worked. Okay. All right. Where were we? Okay, I saw the hands over on this side, and so we're not going to forget you. Okay. Hands. Oh, did y'all decide to bypass somebody over here?
Yeah, I ignored
Oh, yeah, okay. Tara.
One is don't defraud one another.
What does that mean?
Do
Okay?
not lead anyone on.
Yes. What does that mean? No, but that's good. Yes, I was hoping somebody would say that one.
Yeah, pretty much just don't lead anyone on.
Not to lead somebody on?
Yeah.
Okay. Does it kind of go with what one of them was saying about in the right season? Didn't somebody say the right season? Who was that? Leah said that? About, in other words, don't begin a relationship unless it's the appropriate season for it in life. Well, not defrauding is one of the ways that people will, they will start a relationship. Say, for instance, they're just too young and they start a relationship, or they don't have a job yet, they don't have a career path, they have no way to provide for a family. So why would you begin a relationship when it's not the right season, right? Which would be a form of defrauding also. So I'm kind of linking those two principles a little bit. Okay, so over here, Izzy.
Don't compromise yourself for a boy or a girl you like.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, don't give up your beliefs or change your stance on whatever your opinion is based on if someone else disagrees with you.
Okay. Be true to yourself, be true to God. Right? Okay.
Don't cohabitate.
Don't cohabitate.
Yeah, that's the way I used to say it whenever I taught abstinence.
Cohabitate was one of the topics. Yes. And we went through all the stats and how frequently people will cohabit.
Yes, so whenever I taught abstinence, I also went all throughout those, including the divorce rates.
Right, all the stats that go with that and how disastrous it is. Okay, yeah. All right, very good. Y'all are doing pretty good, and this is a closed book test. I'm impressed. Okay, all right. Should we let Hudson say something?
No.
Oh, you're not letting Hudson say something?
Oh, should I?
Well, yeah, you should let him.
It's fine. I've misread the moment. I'm sorry.
I mean, just because he uses tooth whitener doesn't mean we should. No, he doesn't use tooth whitener. He really doesn't. He just has great teeth. Okay.
See? He probably does.
So like getting advice from your like friends and like your parents and like your leaders.
Okay.
Like making sure you have their approval for this type of
Okay.
thing.
Getting counsel, getting input. Okay, good. Wow, that was good, wasn't it? Okay, so, oh wait, she already went once. Is she special?
Yeah.
Well, if I was desperate, we have a lot of hands up, so you just get one shot at it, ladies and gentlemen.
Do not awaken love before it pleases. That also goes with the time and season, but also if you're in a relationship, do not say the L word unless you're ready to commit to that person and have the ring.
The L word.
Love.
Like.
It's okay. It's fair.
Okay. So that's nice, Peyton. You kind of tied together some things. That's good.
You're not supposed to kill your life partner?
Now, oh, wait a minute. Now, Michael, is this your first Thursday? No, this is your first Thursday night. You've never heard any of this. Okay, all right. Scratch that from the record. I didn't identify him earlier as a first-timer on Thursday. He's been Sunday, but he hasn't been Thursday. Okay. But he's right. Don't kill your life partner. All right. Okay, was there one more over here? Next to you, Izzy, was one of the... Oh, okay.
Y'all wasted your turn. Wait, I forgot.
Stricken from the record, yes. Okay, what's happening? Okay, we're about to wrap this up. We're kind of meandering here.
Yeah, I was just going to straight up say it.
You're what?
Don't have sex before marriage. It's just straight up saying it. I mean,
That's back to the body's
I
the
know,
temple.
I know y'all did.
She wanted to
general,
say
but
it
no
more
one straight
plainly.
up said it. So.
All right. Okay, we're going to close with that one. What, was Naomi going to say something? All right, Naomi.
Don't date because you're desperate. And you're afraid to be alone. I'm going to die alone. Grow up.
Oh, don't date because you're desperate. Okay. See, I don't actually remember saying some of the things y'all are saying, but I'm glad that's what you got. You're using your own words, right? You're translating it. Okay. Yes, they have. These are the cliff notes. What? All right, Carmen has yet to speak, so she has the floor. Okay, this is going to be it. I mean, I actually said that was it with that one, but...
Okay, make it count.
Well, it's not like one of the principles, but it's the chart that you sent, or that you like showed, and...
That counts. I showed a chart?
Yeah,
then that's
of
fair
like
game.
how people meet like their significant other, and how it's like majority online now.
Oh, that chart.
Yeah, that chart.
Yeah, okay. Right. But that wasn't really making a point other than I was giving you a stat. Right, but was there a lesson learned in the online dating thing? All right, go to church. Go to church. All right. Okay, we do need to cover some actual teaching tonight because next week I'm gonna have a short teaching about restoration and how you restore mistakes, how you restore where you feel like, I've made so many mistakes, I've made such a mess of my life. I mean, you can be really young and really feel a little bit distressed over the fact that maybe you've already made a lot of mistakes. And so I'm going to talk about what restoration looks like next week. And it's a very powerful conclusion. And then after I talk about restoration, we're going to have a Q&A period. Are y'all starting to write down some questions? It won't be fun unless y'all have questions next week. All right, Kaya's already banking questions. All right, so I'm going to do another discussion. It's going to be much shorter, so you'll have to be very quick on this one. Why do you think people are often in such a hurry to rush past the friendship stage? Do you think it matters? Okay, lust. No, we're not going to write these down. This just we're kind of moving off from that. You can take that board down too. Okay, all right. Cameron, did you want to elaborate on that or? Give him a mic. Where's our mic? Come on. Christopher, are y'all distracting my man? Takes 4 girls to distract you.
I don't know how to take that.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like nowadays people are just like really wrapped up in, having, just sleeping with each other, having fun, and they're not basing their core values and stuff on really getting to know somebody on a deep, intimate level. And
Okay.
people are really rushed to get, physical with each other.
Right.
And
Okay.
I feel like that's just becoming more common with younger people
Yes.
as time goes. So.
Good point, Cameron. I see Kaya and I see Izzy, and I'll probably stop with that.
You can be friends with multiple people, but if you're not terrible, you can only date one. So,
So you can only date one at a time.
So basically, it sounds really gross to say it this way, but people want to quote, stake their claim like this. If I start dating them already, then they'll be taken and no one can take them. Yeah.
Oh,
again,
like a
it's kinda
dibs
gross.
thing? I got to get my foot in the door?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, calling dibs.
Okay, so they want to get past the friendship stage because they want dibs.
Yeah.
They have a claim. They're going to stake a claim. Yeah. Okay, all right. And then there was one more over here. Was it Izzy? Okay.
People are so quick to rush through the friendship stage because like the environment you're in. A lot of people could be dating and you feel very singled out because you're single, which is a pun. But no, it's very mainstream to just rush through things and just have a partner just for the title of I have a partner.
Okay, good. All right. So we're going to look at principle number 9 tonight. I'm going to call this the principle of faith and trust. And in related to the principle of faith and trust, there's a component to it of developing inner confidence. There's a little passage in the New Testament that says, whatever is not of faith is sin. And so it's very important that in the relationships arena of being able to settle this area of your life eventually, that you're in faith. That you have a genuine relationship with God Himself. We talked about that last week. How do you hear His voice? How do you get guidance? And once you have met all of the framework of principles, then you still need to hear the Lord. And some of the people that love you the most, they also will often bear witness whether they are hearing the Lord. And so whatever not of faith is sin. So it's very important, and I have 2 scriptures I want to give you. Hebrews 11:6, but it says, but without faith it is impossible to please God, for he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of God. These are the words of Jesus. Seek first His kingdom, kingdom meaning His government, His right to rule your life. Seek first His kingdom, the kingdom of God in your life, and His righteousness. In other words, you seek to be like Him, to emulate the goodness and the holiness of God. And these things are high priorities in your life, of the highest priority. And He says, and all these things will be added to you. So what He's saying is that God's provision kicks in when our priorities are correct. And so it's a beautiful concept of being able to approach your life with truly faith. And Amanda gave such an amazing story last week. And she was married at 31. And she was talking about her journey over the last 10 years, 12, 13 years, as a single young lady. When I met her, she was 17. When she came to our early young adult ministry some years ago. And I watched her and her journey through all that time and how she processed and how she laid it before the Lord, and at times had to overcome a lot of, at times, a sense of vulnerability, like, you become aware that time is moving past, the clock is ticking, and you begin to, it's really easy to slip into fear and to be anxious and to start wanting to take things into your own hands. But you wrestled with God on this, and you were in faith. And I watched you do it, and it was an amazing thing to see her do that. And now look, she's got a good man. And she's got another person coming into the fold on the way. That is one of the most amazing things, when you realize how much the stakes are so high of getting this decision right. This is not a game. I mean, when you marry somebody, it's for life. If it's before God, what God has put together, let no man put asunder. Let's make sure that God is putting it together. And so, Jeanette and I, when we met, it was just the 2 of us, and we had 2 or 3 years where we didn't have any children. But now, we go on a family reunion with just our children, their spouses, and our grandchildren, and there are 22 of us. I mean, it's unbelievable, and it's hard when you're a young adult. It's hard for me at 21, 22, 23 years old to imagine the legacy that was involved in the choices I was making back then that were going to affect so many people in my future. So yeah, Jeanette and I still will look at it. And today she had 4 grandkids at the house, and she took them to the museum and all this stuff to give my daughter Alicia kind of a reprieve today. So we want to be in faith, because this is a very, very serious thing to get right. You don't want to get this wrong. So there are a lot of things that people do when they're not in faith. Things they do out of their insecurities. Really bad choices, bad decisions are made when people want to take it into their own hands, But we understand that as an individual, you have a hole in your heart that can only be filled by the Lord himself. And so if that's not filled by a relationship, a real vibrant relationship with the Lord Jesus, with your Creator, if that void in your soul is not filled by a relationship with him, then you will begin to try to fill that void through all kinds of other means. And it can really get you in a lot of trouble. And so I want to re-underscore, if you're not confident about having a very real, vibrant relationship with the Lord, because the Lord wants to be personal with you. And if you haven't been able to begin growing and pursuing that part of your life, then you're going to have this void, this ache, this struggle within, and you don't even, it's almost unconscious. You don't realize that you're trying to fill the void with all these other things that are often very destructive. So sometimes people will try to fill that void by being in a relationship, by dating or by having a boyfriend or having a girlfriend. And because that void, it's not because it's the right season. It doesn't mean it's because that God has brought you together and it's his order. It's not because of anything that's really in a sense of a divine rhythm. It's just that you are filling this void. So I see men do it, and they'll just date one girl after another, and it's this whole daisy chain thing of one relationship after another, and it's just kind of what I call experimental dating. And it can be so destructive. And usually there are boundaries and moral lines that are crossed that end up being baggage in your future. And there's some people, and I've met people, I've known people that I remember a couple of young ladies that were a part of my church in another life. We're talking a long time ago. These are not people anybody in here would even know remotely. Okay, so don't even try to, he's talking about. No, I'm not. Not anybody that you would even remotely know. These people are adults now. They have children. They're married. But many years ago, I met with two sisters who were cheerleaders in high school and in college. And they were in the cool crowd. And they were so enamored with football players and all these people that wanted to date them. And they ended up having one boyfriend after another. And they were wrecked. They were completely wrecked and they were from a Christian home, but they had been sexually active with most of the men that they dated. And they came to me because they realized they were broken. They remembered, I hadn't seen them in years, right? And this was a long time ago. So I hadn't seen them in years, but they met with me in my office at my house, and they wanted me to help them process what they had done to themselves, the damage that had been done. And it all was centered around this kind of attitude that I cannot be without a boyfriend. I have to always have a boyfriend. And so what happens, they have an identity crisis. They don't even know who they are anymore. Everything they do is centered around pleasing a man, and now the next man, the next man, the next man. I don't know how many men that they were dating during that time, but a number of years. And so it's all motivated by this deep anxiety that I've got to have somebody. And there seems to be a fear about facing God alone. There seems to be a fear about facing yourself all alone and trying to make a way as an adult human being that begins to be self-reliant, build your life, and without necessarily having somebody there all the time. So how do you find your identity if you're always looking to please somebody else? You see, the insecurities that come from these lame proposals. I say lame proposals because a young man he'll bring up marriage and we'll just talk about it. We'll kick it around. Like, well, maybe if I could, maybe if we were to get married someday, how would you, what would you, how would you, and you get in these conversations, and there also can be defrauding or leading on conversations because you're spurring on hope in this person, but there's no proposal on the table. So the conversation is covering the topic and the subject of marriage without any commitment to back it up. And I'm like, why would you start a conversation like that? Are you trying to get her to put her cards on the table without you making a commitment and sticking your neck out? And that would be insecurity. Those types of conversations happen because somebody is wanting closure without commitment. And so just beware of that. And a lot of times the girls can you understand my bias. I tend to be a little harder on the men in the whole series, but I understand it goes both ways. Either side can do this. Sometimes people will, out of their insecurity, their fears, not faith, they will cling and persist in perpetuating a relationship that they know deep in their heart is wrong. It's below par. Something's off. And sometimes people will stay in a persisting relationship and they feel like, well, I've already invested this much time. I've already invested this much energy. I remember a couple that I was counseling with. I was a lot younger, but I had a little bit of wisdom. Nonetheless, I was a young pastor. And they were an older couple to me at the time. And they had so many problems. And they had been dating. This is their third marriage each. And I'm talking to them. The more I talk to them, and they're like, well, can you help us? Can you help us, give us marriage counseling? And I said to them, you're wanting me to give you marriage counseling and you're not even married yet. This is a disaster waiting to happen. And so I told them, I said, I'm not going to marry you. I just feel confident that the foundation's off, that your motivations are off. And you know what they told me? They said, we have to go through with this at this point because we've already bought airline tickets. In other words, they felt vested. We'd already made this decision. We can't back out now. The wedding is set for in a month or two. And the woman's daughter, who's an adult daughter, called me and she begged her mom, your pastor's not even willing to marry you because he sees so many problems. Please, Mom, don't do this. They were divorced within 6 months. Because you can see their motivation was all wrong. They were not in faith. The principles weren't intact. They were forcing something, pushing something through that wasn't right. Sometimes people will, and we did mention this before, but they will become promiscuous in a relationship because they feel like that if I don't cross these boundaries and there's an anxiety in this too, a lack of personal confidence. I'm going to go ahead and give in because they're telling me that I don't love them unless I cross this boundary. They're telling me unless I'm willing to go to bed with them, I don't love them. And the only way I'm going to satisfy him and prove to him that I love him is I'm going to have to sleep with him. I'm talking about before marriage, right? And it's this great regret with that. It's not like the way they portray it in the movies and TV shows all the time where there's this moment of passion. And you know how often, I should do a statistical thing, but almost every program, every movie, every situation, unless it's a Christian movie, they will kiss the first time and the next scene, they're waking up in bed together the next day. And hopefully that's all that there was to see. So here's the thing. Is develop a foundation of confidence in the Lord in your relationship with Him. Begin to think, I need to build my life in the framework of true faith, to know His Word, to treasure fellowship with other believers, to be submitted to pastoral authority, to parental authority, and this kind of thing. When I say that, I don't mean necessarily, if you're in a self-reliant adult, doesn't mean that you're obeying your parents still. It says children obey your parents. So sometimes people are kind of a little desperate and clingy, and they have these clutching hands, and they want to hold on to a really bad, rotten relationship because they feel so vested and they won't back out. And then you end up with a runaway bride, which actually would be better than just going through with it anyway. So I'm going to give you the two hands lesson. So these are people, these fingers, okay? And this, what I'm going to show you principle-wise, is something that applies in business, if you're in sales, if you're going to buy a used car and you go to the used car lot, but it also applies in relationships. And a lot of people don't understand this, and so what will happen is they will begin to push hard. The reflexive thing, and many people think, well, if I just push hard enough and I nag hard enough and I'm persistent enough, they'll give in, and sometimes maybe they will. But if I just push hard, but usually what happens in human nature, if you push too hard, the person will do what? The other person will do what? They'll move back. They'll move away. And then this person comes even farther. Oh, now you're like pathological, leave me alone. I'm blocking you or whatever. And I'll see this for people they will be so hardcore in their persistence that I've seen young women that they'll block their phones, they will warn them, they will tell them, you're crowding my space, I feel suffocated by you. And so what's happening is they're pushing so hard, and they get this like, and the person will rebel. And so if you just, it's the same way, if you go out to look at used cars, you go on the car lot, and if the salesman is pushing you too hard, what do you want to do? Like, you got to buy this now, and I can talk to my boss, but this offer is only going to last for the next hour, and if you don't do something now, you're going to lose this deal. It's a deal of a lifetime, and they push, and everything in you wants to run, right? But if the salesman just step back a bit, say, I see you need some space, maybe you need some time to think this through. If you'd like, take it home for a test drive. Let me know tomorrow what you think about it. I mean, there are ways to approach it that the person would go, and they drop their defenses, go, yeah, I would like to do that. See, it's the same way with most relationships. We have to know when to back off. And what happens is if we're motivated by the strong sense of insecurity and we're not in faith, we end up on a relational basis pushing so hard with people that we're actually repelling them, and people wonder why they're alone all the time. Because they haven't learned the art of the tension of kind of when to push and when not to push. I was in a professional sales for a number of years, orthopedics, medical sales, and I was working with some anesthesiologists, and we had to change the entire program within a hospital. And one of the anesthesiologists, and I consider it a compliment, I made numerous presentations with him. I tried to set up some things for him to be able to do some sciatic and femoral blocks and things like that for some of his orthopedic patients. And he said that it was nicely pushy. I thought, is that a compliment? Or is it not a compliment? But I realized later he meant it completely as a compliment. Because what I was trying to find was that balance as a professional salesperson of having to make a sale and having to present information and having to kind of present the case, and to him and the hospital officials that are involved in it, but at the same time to know kind of where to give space. And it's the same way in relationships. But I believe that when you have faith in God and you're walking with Him, you have a real relationship with Christ, that you'll have more wisdom when it comes to this kind of rhythm I'm talking about. Let's be in faith. I remember a lady that I knew her husband was being tempted to go out with this other woman, and it seemed like he would go to a bar or whatever, and this other woman would show up, and then he would be like, oh gosh, I feel so tempted, and this other woman was coming after him. Well, his wife would come talk to me, and as a pastor and as a friend, and she would say she was so desperate, and she was so full of fear, and everything she did in handling that situation was pushing him away. She was so absolutely irate, out of her mind, crazy, in jealousy, and a lot of it's understandable in light of an affair about to happen. But the affair hadn't actually happened yet. And I tried to tell her, I pled with her, if you want to avoid an affair in this marriage, This is what you have to do. But you cannot be driven by fear and paranoia and anxiety and suspicion. You've got to get dominion of this on a spiritual faith level, or you will lose. So, beware of the perpetual relationship. My daughter, Alicia, she was so smart about relationships. And she just would not allow any young man. And look, I mean, she's very attractive. She loved the Lord. She was very strong in her faith. But she would never allow a young man to date. She refused to do experimental dating. Oh, well, he's a nice guy. I guess I'll go out with him some, or I'll go out with this one. And there were a number of them. I think I told you guys about this a few weeks ago, but there were a number of young men that were interested in her, and it was in our young adult fellowship, which at that time was like over 100 young adults in this group. And a lot of these guys were like student pilots, military pilots, and once in a while one of them would come talk to me and say, Pastor, I would really like permission to date your daughter. And I know my daughter. I know how she thinks. Or there'd be another young man that says, I'm interested in your daughter. And I remember telling one of them, I said, good luck. I mean, I knew her. I knew she was not going to play the game. She's simply not going to do it. She was not going to date until she believed that she found the one. And that's exactly what she did. So when she finally did date, but she had knowledge. In other words, she had developed an understanding of who this man was, this Jay. You all met Jay. She had a good idea of who he was as a man because he was a serving participant in our fellowship for quite a while. And so you can observe people. You can see kind of what they're like, their attitude, their reactions, their responses to things. So she ended up marrying him, but I never saw her date. I know that may seem like a completely different paradigm. She's the youngest one. So she says, I watched all the mistakes of all the older ones and I learned. So she was spanked the least of all of the kids. Nathan was spanked the most of all the kids. I probably shouldn't have told you that. That's highly confidential. All right. So what she had were lots of great friendships. But what she really did is during those years as a young adult is she invested in female friendships instead of being distracted by men all the time. And so she established some of her, to this day, I mean, we're talking now really, I mean, how long have they been married? 15 years or something? To this day, she has friends that she still considers very close friends that were cultivated during that time in her life when she was refusing to just date all these guys and get distracted. So invest in relationships and friendships. I had a guy, and this is also, I'm still in kind of the faith realm and having security before the Lord and this kind of thing. I had a young lady in my church in another life, and we're talking, I don't even want to tell you how long ago, but we're talking decades, right? And this young woman, and now she's an old lady. I mean, I say old lady, she's probably mid-60s or something. That's not really old, but not in my perspective, but I realize from y'all's perspective that'd be pretty old. Okay, so she was in our church, single, unmarried, single, and she really loved the Lord. She served in our church, and she had a fabulous attitude, but she had a few things working against her. She knew she could never have children. She's in her early 20s. She said, she cannot have children. She had a cleft lip repair. So she had a kind of a defect in her lip from as a child. She had, and she was a little bit overweight. And so you look at that and you go, okay, so she's got all these things kind of might be in a negative side of the ledger for her. And a young man showed an interest in her. And so we're like, so here's her temptation. He says to her, he's from Austin. He says, I want you to move up to Austin. And I want you to live up there and work in my company. And then we'll explore the possibility of marriage someday. Now, I knew this man, and I knew he was a turtle. And that he would get a comfortable pattern going with her, and he would be this turtle, and he would have her in his world up there, and that he would be in this pattern with her who knows how long, and would never actually act and get married and do the whole thing. So I told her, she came to me and Jeanette for advice, and I said, I'm going to tell you to do something you may not feel, it's going to be uncomfortable for you. But I'm going to tell you, number one, do not move up to Austin. You make him come here. You are not low-hanging fruit. He's going to have to fight for this. We're going to put some hoops out there, and if he's going to win you over, he has to win you over. And so he would drive down. He would attend our church, listen to my preaching. I was probably in my 20s, I don't know, 30-ish. And so it went on like this for a number of months. But I'll tell you this, by her hanging tough and refusing to budge, he had to do all this work. And guess what? He did a formal, for real proposal. Not kicking it around. She followed our advice by the book. And the fact is, she stayed in faith. She could have thought, no man will ever want me because I can't have children. No man will ever want me because I have this cleft lip. And I'm not designed or built with the perfect figure or whatever at the time she was struggling with, thinking, I'm not necessarily, but see, she got in faith and God provided, and then they've been happily married and they adopted children and raised them. They became, I think they became officers in the military. I think there were 2 young men that they adopted. They were babies and raised them, and she's a friend of mine on Facebook. Reach out to her, I'll give you her name. Say, hey, our pastor told us all about you, and I don't even know how she would remember. I mean, she probably remembers all of this. To this day, we have a mutual respect, and she does live in the Austin area, and he had a very flourishing construction business that she helped him with for years. Sometimes people will think, I need to be in a really big church because after all, this is a numbers game. I gotta have a big pool of people. So if I can go to a really big church, then maybe I can get more access to more guys, or vice versa. And I remember there was a church in Victoria a number of years ago. It was, at that time, it would have been considered like a mega church. Maybe 1,000 members or whatever. And they had a singles group. The singles group is not like a young adults group. It tends to be a little more older group of people. Sometimes they've been married, divorced, and these are people in their 30s and 40s and so forth. So I had a friend who was single again, and he attended the singles group at this church in Victoria. And he told me, he says, I was in this singles group for 5 years. And there were 500 singles in this group. I think if I remember, it probably says it in my notes. He says, I never saw a single wedding out of that group. Not one in 5 years. So the lesson in this is that don't ever think it's a numbers game. Because if it had been a numbers game, he could have gone into that group and thought, man alive, I mean, this is like, the chocolate factory. There's so many women in this group, or there's so many, and he could have thought that way, but he didn't. He ends up remarrying, but it wasn't somebody from that group. So what I'm trying to tell you is be in faith, trust God, do not just get in the natural. I have a young lady that attended this church. Her mom is somebody, I led her dad to the Lord many years ago, and they live not too far from here, but far enough. And but the mom, I'm trying to remember this story. We were in a prayer meeting, and I don't do this. This is totally out of character for me, but I could sense her anxiety building. And we were in a small church in Portland, Texas, across the bridge. And I could sense her anxiety. She was thinking, maybe I'll go over to Faith Temple or one of these larger churches that has singles groups. And so she thought, and so I'm in this small, tiny little prayer meeting. Our church is a lot smaller than this church at that time. And so I had a word of the Lord for her, and I'm telling you, I don't do this. It's the only time I've ever done it when it comes to matchmaking or coupling or anything like that I can ever recall giving somebody a prophetic word that said, and I told her, your husband is coming. You haven't met him yet, but he will be coming through this church in a year. And if you go run over there, you will miss him. Kind of bold, huh? So it was a week or two later, I led her future husband to the Lord in my living room. And about a year or so later, plus, they met and they eventually married. And one of their children attended this church for a number of years. Amazing story. But again, trying to push her to stay in a faith arena. You following this? Let's see. Okay. Does being in faith allow for initiative? Of course it does. Doesn't mean you sit around passively and do nothing. What does it say? Proverbs 18:22. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor with the Lord. I know it's talking to the men here, but does that mean the women do nothing? Well, I don't think so. I think there's things that you can do on both sides of the equation and have a particular posture. But the most important posture, yes, the men show a lot of initiative and it gives them a lot of advantage. And that's a cultural thing, but it's also kind of a biblical thing. You see it with Jesus. You see it in New Testament where Paul says we love him. We love as the bride of Christ. We love him because he first loved us. And so but it's a pattern by nature that the men are the initiators. Once in a while you hear an awkward story where the woman just can't take it anymore and she proposes to him and has the ring, but it's kind of an awkward. So you say, well, I don't know if I'm very beautiful. I don't know if I'm so many other people that are so attractive and so beautiful, and why don't I now tell you the same answer? Be in faith. Trust God. I can tell you some strikingly, and I gave you many examples, 2 weeks ago, of people that I know personally that didn't get married until they were in their 40s or 50s. We're talking about very talented, smart, beautiful, attractive, and or handsome people. So just having certain looks does not mean, it may mean that it may open some opportunities to you, but it doesn't mean that you're in faith. It's much better to be in faith. I mean, I see some young ladies that are like boy magnets. And I'm like, you've got to deflect them. You can't just entertain all of them. Do not, no. All right. Don't be a boy magnet. Don't be a girl magnet. Okay, so do you want to make it, you don't want to make it difficult for God either. Okay, so, all right. Don't make it hard for God. All right. Be the best you can be. Don't say, well, I don't have to brush my teeth or use hygiene or do anything. I'm just going to stay in faith and I can just expect again. I'll tell you right now, if you smell, you're never going to get anybody. So there's a part you have to play on a practical level. Look the best you can look. We all only have certain potential, but look the best you can. Stay in shape, stay fit, eat well. What do I have? I have a picture of healthy eating. But I know y'all are young people, you don't care. And I understand that. But I'm 69, so I actually care. I actually pay attention because I can gain weight and I could be really big really fast. Okay? But I have to be careful all the time. And unfortunately, some people, even when they're younger, have metabolisms that have to be coaxed along somewhat to prevent that. And I didn't have this slower metabolism that I have now until I started hitting my 40s. And I had to really start watching what I eat, how I'm active and staying active and all those things. But when I was younger, gee whiz, I could eat a pan of brownies with ice cream and I wouldn't gain an ounce. I'd burn it all up. I actually had washboard abs that were not covered by layers of subcutaneous fat. And so, but you need to do your part. Be your best. Look your best. And then what do? We trust God and find poise, find faith, find confidence, and learn to smile. There's nothing to me more beautiful when somebody smiles. And, right, she's smiling. And so, don't let your teeth go brown. All right, be the best you can, look the best you can. The highest reason, I'm going to come back to what I ended with last week, and I'm going to give you something. I'm going to go a little bit farther. I think you're with me. The highest reason for getting married, and this is rooted in Genesis. I gave you this last week. But that is this, talking about that God would provide a helpmate, remember, for Adam. He said, so when you as a single person can no longer fulfill the call of God on your life as a single person, then God will provide a suitable helper for them. That's God's part. We do our part, and then we trust God to do His part. And it may not happen when you think. And I realize in our culture, all these things happen later than they used to when I was in college. Most of us, when I was in college, we were getting married almost immediately with our college degrees, and sometimes just prior to getting a college degree. The average age of marriage was like 21, 22 years old back then. And now it's closer to 30 years old. And we talked about what it means to, how do you handle that single period, not to be in limbo, how to have a very strong sense of purpose, a drive toward a missional drive in your nature and character and who you are. That's all part of it. But everything I'm teaching you is with the assumption that you're developing and want to develop a passion for following and serving God as a priority. So the 10th principle, I've got to touch on it at least a little bit, is the principle of friendship. And it's way underrated. So many people feel like it's like this curse. I'm stuck in the friendship zone. How do I get out? It's like the high priority is break the friendship zone and get out of it, because you could be stuck there forever. Like some sort of, Star Trek holodeck. So I have a notable thought for you. This is actually really old, and it may not apply that much to us here now, but regarding the NET, the young adult ministry that we have here, if we develop an underlying preoccupation with matchmaking and coupling off, it would be our demise as a ministry and young adult community. The heart and soul of this ministry must be missional and kingdom building, kingdom mindedness. Reaching and building people to glorify God. We need to be discipling and getting the calling of God to develop good, healthy relationships within Christian community, but highly missional. So the key to understanding this series is understanding the importance of friendship. Friendships can be deep and long-lasting. Some people will ruin a great friendship by insisting that it must be more. Maybe it could be more someday, but they insist on it being more, maybe perhaps out of season, and ruins the friendship. Some people are in such a hurry, they skip past the friendship stage, not understanding its intrinsic value. Remember, we went through the 12 steps of bonding and intimacy? There's a process, and it takes time. Some people will abandon and scrap great friendships on a dime simply because they meet someone. So the Bible, we see friendship with God from beginning to end. It's like the paramount objective is that we're friends with God. David and Jonathan, we see in the Old Testament, Samuel, who were royalty. They had a deep friendship. They exchanged armor, and they had a lifetime bond. It's an amazing story. Jesus himself, besides the 12 disciples, had a close circle of friends. You see that. He had Mary and Martha and Lazarus. These people were very, very much important to Jesus, but they were not part of the 12, but they were friends. So friendships in the context of rich Christian community allow for getting to know people in a way that a dating scene only won't allow. I hope this is resonating. Having a friendship community. I'm going to give you an example. Remember I showed you that picture of my college fellowship a couple of weeks ago? And I showed you all the different kind of love interests and where they ended up and how most of them didn't pan out and all this. Okay, so that fellowship that I was a part of for 4 years, was getting my degree in geology at the time, that group of Christians, there were a lot of marriages that came out of that fellowship, but no one dated. So how's that possible? I think I took Jeanette on one date. I took her to see the movie The Hiding Place and took her out to dinner. That was a big, bold step. So there's a little dating here and there, but by and large, the group had no need to date because, and we'll say our young adult community is maybe 60 or so people, not here at the moment, but in the broader community. And that was similar to the size of our community and our fellowship on campus then. It fluctuated. Sometimes it was 40 or 50, sometimes 100, but it was generally in the same zone. And they would not date. It's not like somebody said, okay, everybody, no dating. In fact, we were a student-led ministry. There were no adults running it. So it was something we imposed on ourselves, but it's not like we imposed it and said, okay, nobody can date in our fellowship, our group that we have, our Christian group. It never was spoken. It was never happened because it never needed to happen because we were satisfied with the relationships on a friendship level of how we would get to know each other without the stigma of a date. And it was actually much more effective. And this is where it's a different way of thinking, a different paradigm of how you actually develop relationships and friendships with people without necessarily thinking of the traditional. And I'm not saying I'm against a date. What I'm saying is there may be a different way to approach this than perhaps you're accustomed to thinking. Can you go from a friendship straight to engagement? I would say yes, that's what I did. I mean, you would probably, if you looked at Jeanette and I at the time, you would probably say, well, they're talking. But there was no, if you really looked at us and understood the dynamic of our relationship, it was more friendship than anything. And it was for a couple of years. So we have to understand the great value of friendship. So I have a chart I'm going to give you, and this is the one that kind of everybody wants to know, well, what, and I realize most people will probably not go directly from a friendship to engagement. They need an intermediate stage. Most people don't do it, but I did it, and I know other people that did it. They would go straight from friendship to engagement and then marriage, right? But most people feel they need an intermediate courtship period. And so, because I want to accommodate you, I don't want to make it impossible. Like, how in the world do I go from friendship to engagement? How do I do that? It's a very awkward transition, and so sometimes people really do need an intermediate. So what does a courtship look like as opposed to experimental dating? What does a courtship look like as opposed to what kind of the modern cultural pattern of dating people looks? And so I kind of did this, I developed this over a number of years. It's not something I got from anybody else. So if you have a better way you want me to adapt the chart, make it better, I can do that. It's mine. But at some point in the friendship, there will be some leaning. You know what I mean by leaning? Like leaning. Okay, I have a clip that's going to explain this.
This whole evening did not work out well at all.
Oh, and I'm supposed to share some responsibility in that?
No. Could you slow down a little bit? Look, it was just a misunderstanding, and on top of the Joe Jr. thing...
Excuse me?
Nothing.
No, there's no nothing now. What Joe Jr. thing?
The leaning thing.
The leaning thing?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you mean by the leaning? Because he gave me flowers?
And then you leaned.
And then I leaned.
Yeah.
Okay. How did I lean when I leaned?
How were you leaning? It's
Yeah.
a lot different than hugging. Hugging's very different. Hugging, that involves arms and hands. And leaning is whole bodies moving in like this. Leaning involves wanting and accepting. Leaning.
Hey, Luce. Is this guy bothering you?
No, no.
Are you sure? Because it looks like he's leaning.
Thank you. See?
I'll be right over here if you need me.
Okay, thank you very much.
I know karate.
It looks like he's leaning. Okay, so let's look at that chart again for a few minutes, and then I'll probably look at it again next week. But I just want to kind of give you a map, a hands-on practical map. How does a Christian courtship look as opposed to the typical model of experimental dating? So if you look at each of these, your stage in life needs to be correct. Experimental dating, marriage is not in the foreseeable future. You're just dating. For whatever reason you want to, maybe it's a hobby or something. Christian courtship, it's a marriageable age. The season of life works. Okay, that's really important. You're at a point, being able to be a provider is very important in this whole process. Affection. Experimental dating, very physically involved. Christian courtship is restrained and respectfully affectionate. The purpose. So experimental dating, the purpose is centered around self-gratification, which is an end in itself. A Christian courtship is a time of careful investigation. In other words, is this individual appropriate for marriage in the future? That would be the objective of Christian courtship. It doesn't mean you talk about it all the time. It just means there's an understanding that this is not experimental. We're not toying with each other. We're not, playing some sort of game. There's a serious process involved here. The end point, the objective of experimental dating is how it ends up is a traumatic, painful breakup. And you have to remember, every relationship that you ever start, it either ends in marriage or a breakup. Every time. It's one or the other. And that's why friendship, you don't have to break up. That's the beauty of the friendship. It's a low-risk relationship, if you will, and you don't have to go through the traumatizing. Let's see, endpoint. Emphasis. Oh, and the courtship side, if you have an endpoint that doesn't work out, you can have an intelligent parting. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean it's not difficult, but or it ends in engagement. So that there can be a point where a couple has been dating and they realize through a course of events in their exploration that they really aren't appropriate for each other moving forward for marriage. And so you don't keep messing around, you end it. And you move on with your life. It doesn't mean it's not hard, but it means that that's the responsible adult thing to do. You end it. Okay, so emphasis of the experimental dating is this is my boyfriend, this is my girlfriend, and the courtship, mature, purposeful companionship. That's the emphasis. Interrelations. Experimental dating often is possessive, it's jealous, and it's preoccupied. It's all about this other person, and as opposed to a healthy, secure, undemanding, and free relationship. And so the Christian courtship actually looks more like a friendship than it does a swirling romance. Does that make sense? I'm trying to draw a picture for you on a practical level to kind of help you to maybe see it a little differently than maybe you're used to. Duration. Often a experimental dating pattern, it will endure, often drags on and eventually can wear itself out, especially if it's a defrauding relationship. You started out a season, eventually it just wears out. And so a Christian courtship only is to occur as long as it's necessary for its purpose. The disposition of experimental dating is a roller coaster, it's insecure, and it's very emotional. The other would be steady and Christ-centered. I mean, truly Christ-centered. Because if this is going to move forward in engagement marriage someday, you want to have a foundation that's truly built on the truth and God's Word and the principles of God's Word, right? Disposition, I did that one. Parents' role. Often, experimental dating, there's very little value placed on the parent's role. And sometimes it can be antagonistic relationship with the parents, like, what do you know? But out of my life, kind of thing. But a courtship, you should be seeking for consent and advice openly from parents. Doesn't mean you're doing that as a couple. It just means that you are allowing for input along the way. And then what is the pastoral role? In the dating scene, there's almost no value placed on a pastoral input, but in a courtship, you would seek input. You would proactively look for input and even a blessing from a pastoral authority in your life. So that's kind of the model. That's kind of what it looks like. I think it's doable. It almost looks a lot like a friendship, the right-hand column, but it's kind of allowing a little bit more latitude than just, it's not exactly a friendship, it's more than a friendship, if that makes sense. So I hope you're getting questions in mind, because next week that's what we're going to do. So thank you for being patient. So we do have snacks tonight. Hang out as long as you want. And let's stand and pray together. We'll close. Lord, I just want to thank you that there are ears that are willing to hear tonight. And Lord, I thank you that there are many here tonight that have a hunger for wisdom and understanding. That, Lord, and part of faith is being patient. And meanwhile, being productive. Lord, I pray if there's anybody here tonight that's not highly missional, that, Lord, you would deposit within our DNA that sense of mission, that you have something for us to be accomplishing in behalf of your kingdom. Lord, may we be a kingdom-minded fellowship of young adult believers. We commit this time to you in Jesus' name. Amen.